The next step is writing out the list of materials and procedure. Okay, those are two separate things, even though this is the same section. So these are the instructions for the lab. What are you doing in the lab? So we're going to do this as a list. The materials, we'll use a bulleted list, and then the procedure, I usually like to do a numbered list, and I'll show you how to do those two things. I'm going to come down to the bottom here. Up here at the top, we have numbered list and bulleted list. For materials, I'm going to make it a bulleted list. Okay, so I want you to hit enter a couple of times to get out of that bulleted list, because we're going to start a new one. And I'm going to have you type materials and go select that, go back up to the headings. That's going to be a heading 3. Hit enter, that will put it back to normal text. Then come up here to the toolbar and we're going to hit bulleted list. And it should be this little round dot instead of these dashes. That's just a formatting thing. If you end up with dashes, that's not the worst thing in the world. So for materials in this lab, I'm going to explain what you're going to use, again, because you're not going to be doing this directly. But if you are conducting this lab yourself or creating a lab yourself, which we'll talk about another time, you want to list all the materials and be specific, because if you say beaker, well, that doesn't tell the person who might be doing the lab next what kind of beaker, how big, how small. If you say a flask, there are many, many, many different kinds of flasks and things like that. So you want to be specific. If it's a 100 milliliter beaker, then you say a 100 milliliter beaker. If there are 5 of something, you want to include that. Include the quantity. Okay, include the quantity and the specific type. Okay, so we're going to say you're going to have 5 rectangular pieces of aluminum foil, a centimeter ruler, a centigram electronic balance. You're also going to have a cylinder of solid aluminum, a 25 milliliter graduated cylinder, and that will be it. Okay, those are the items that we use in this lab. Again, you're not going to actually collect all those materials, but this gives you the idea of how you would do a materials list. So I'm going to hit enter a couple more times to get out of the bulleted list, and now we're going to do the procedure. And highlight that, change it to a heading 3, and get back to normal text. And this time we're going to select up at the top a numbered list, because the procedure is a series of steps, like following a recipe or a set of directions to put something together. So I think it's always helpful to have a numbered list, so you know, first of all, that they go in a specific order, and second of all, if you have questions, you can refer to the specific step in the procedure where you might have an issue. So we're going to go through the procedure, and these all should be, as it says above, you want it to be concise, okay? But you also want to be specific. So it's a balance between giving just enough information but not writing an entire paragraph to list a simple step. The objective here is that if you were to hand this lab report to another student, they should be able to go follow your procedure and do the lab without really having to ask too many questions. So again, specific and detailed enough for someone to follow the instructions, but not so detailed that you have pages and pages of explanation. So the first step that we would do in this lab is determine. Okay, so every step should start with some sort of action word. Determine the mass of the aluminum cylinder and record the results in the data table. Again, we're writing these out before we actually do them, so you'll have a data table ready to go when the time comes to do the lab. Determine volume of the aluminum cylinder. Next, you're going to record the mass of each aluminum square, and then record the length and width of each aluminum square. Okay, so these are the steps that you're going to take. And you note that these steps will be repeated because you're recording each aluminum square. There are 5 of them. So this is a very simple and short procedure. Okay, you're going to take a cylinder, you're going to get its mass by using the balance. You're going to find its volume, and I'll show you how we're going to do that by something called the displacement method. And then we're going to record the mass of the squares of aluminum and then the length and width of each square. Okay, so these, again, we haven't done any calculating yet. These are steps in a procedure. We're measuring, we're taking data, and we're putting that into data tables. The calculations are a separate part of the process. So now what I want you to do is go into your lab report, and in this case you are really just copying these 2 sections as I have them. Feel free to use your own wording if you think there's a better way to word this, and then you can go ahead up and delete out the red highlights, and you now have a new section completed.